Hello and welcome back. All right, this will be the last episode where I focus on hypergrowth. I define hypergrowth as annual growth above 15%, and it should be for more than a couple of years to really count. But this will be, I'll conclude sort of my insights into hypergrowth, high growth investing with this lecture. I'm going to focus on The Gorilla Game, which is a book that I co-authored with Geoff and Tom Kippola. The book got published in 98 and then the second edition 99, so 25 years ago. I'm still pretty proud of that book. In this lecture, I want to talk about the origins of the book, where it came from, how I ended up writing the book with Geoff and Tom, and then the insights I gained in not only writing the book, but really talking about the book and the Gorilla Game over the last 25 years. I want to share that with you. And I still believe those investment rules have great insight and deep merit. All right, let's get going. All right, before we jump into the Gorilla Game, I must tell you that maybe the most fun I've had in the last couple of videos talking about hypergrowth is the email exchange that generated with Geoff Moore. Those of you who don't know Geoff, he's a gem of a guy, wonderful sense of humor, wonderful, great writer, and I'll tell the story about how I ended up co-authoring a book with him a long time ago, which was one of the great highlights of my life. But Geoff I'm very flattered. Geoff's been watching the videos each week and then giving me really excellent feedback. I was like, wow, I didn't anticipate that. And I've really benefited from it. And you've benefited from it because I keep coming back each week and offering up the insights that he's had. And this week I have a gem, which I didn't know. And so I can't say I didn't think of it because I didn't know. But when we talk about crossing the chasm and getting to that early majority, I talked about that a couple of times on the prior videos. The trick is you need to win at least a single early majority to get a foothold crossing the chasm. And what Geoff really talks about is what he calls pragmatists in pain. Again, a phrase that I just love, that the company finds somebody who has a serious pain and they're trying to solve that problem. And if you can go help them solve that problem, you win over a customer, you at least gotten started. And then he has what he calls a bowling alley strategy, which is you want to go knock over pins, other customers that have a similar, maybe the exact same, but certainly a similar problem, go solve that. And each customer you win, you not only do you get another pragmatist into your customer base, but your product gets better. Which is the key. And then you go win another pragmatist and another pragmatist. And so Geoff said that there is a transition where you go from that bowling alley, early pragmatist in pain market to a broader market, which is really the definition of hypergrowth or the tornado, being able to do that. And the key here is, and I thought this was just fabulous when he sent it to me last week, is that when you transition from companies not having budget for the product to having budget for the product. So then the question is, how do the customers, that pragmatist in pain, how do they pay for it? They have budget for an old solution. And then they meet the salesperson or they come upon this new approach, this new solution. They use the old budget for the new product. That's really the win. The win for the salesperson is to get the customer to use an old budget item for a new product. But as Geoff pointed out, which I thought was really cool, is that the moment there now starts to be budget for the new product, you're on your way. And I think that's really important. There's a couple of other things that he talked about, which I think are important. Number two is, remember, pragmatists really only trust other pragmatists. So as you start to enter the hyper growth, it's the pragmatist talking to pragmatists. But here's a subtlety he added, which is that pragmatists not only buy what another pragmatist sort of recommends, but often they want to buy exactly what the other pragmatist bought. So you create this viral effect that's pretty powerful. He called it FOMO, sort of fear of missing out. You don't have the right product set or the right solution when everybody else is moving that way. And he believes, I think he's right, he believes that's what helps create this winner take all market. So again, another great insight into hypergrowth And I thought that subtlety, the two real insights, subtlety are when you go from using old budget for old solutions for the new solution to a new state where there is budget for the new solution. That I thought was pretty cool. And then this reinforcing fact that the safer bet is to buy what other pragmatists are buying, and that could help build the winner take most, winner take all markets. And then if you have natural scale, lots of good things happen. So thanks to Geoff, we continue to learn as we go, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest thing ever. All right, as I talked about in the last video, my first interaction with Geoff was really around his book, Crossing the Chasm, and then Inside the Tornado. But we had lunch, he and I had lunch in New York City in August 1995. I checked my calendar, and he said we're going to discuss writing a new book together, which was pretty heady for me at the time. I was in my mid 30s and still establishing my career. So to be able to write a book with Geoff was pretty cool. He's a very successful author, very successful high tech marketing person, and so I was very flattered that we got to work together. When we started writing that book together in early 1997. All right, that book is The Guerrilla Game. First edition got published in 1998. A revised edition came out in 1999. There's a picture of the revised edition. And what we did in that book is we leveraged Geoff Moore's Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado, and my work on competitive advantage, which is a topic I've thought about a lot, which I had written a paper at this time with Michael Mauboussin on competitive advantage. Pretty cool paper. If you're curious, go back and read it. It stands up pretty well 25 years later. And the idea was to analyze high growth technology companies investing in high tech growth companies, technology companies. Now, perfect timing. We were in the middle of the internet. We sold over 100,000 copies. It was great fun, great experience. One of the highlights of my life. Very proud of the book. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and then what we've really learned. All right. So in the Guerrilla Game, there are two types of games. Oh, by the way, Geoff came up with the idea of the Guerrilla Game. So I want to tip my hat to that. He's very, very good at things like that. Crossing the Chasm, not bad. Inside the Tornado, not bad. I think his next book is Managing Along the Fault Line or something. Not bad. All right, so what we figured out when you write the book, the best part about writing a book is you get much greater clarity into the topic. All right, there are really two types of games in the Guerrilla Game. And there's the Guerrilla Game, and then there's a royalty game. And they each require a different set of investment rules. You really have to approach them differently. So I want to walk through it. All right, the Guerrilla Game, which the book is named after, we came up with, I think Geoff probably came up with this idea that there are gorillas, chimpanzees, and monkeys. Now, anybody that knows much about primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, and monkeys tend not to hang out together, but it's a wonderful metaphor. The Guerrilla Game, or to qualify for the Guerrilla Games, it's really a scale, naturally, inherently a scale business. So software and true platform companies. I talked about platform companies 4 videos ago or something like that. You can go back and listen to that if you have not. So you need true scale, and software is inherently a scale business. And so it lends itself extremely well to this model. And the key here is the strongest gorillas have true network effects. Now, you can have a gorilla that's not have network effects, but the strongest gorillas have true network effects. Again, a topic I talked about. The second game is what we call the royalty game, and that's kind of everything else, things that aren't natural scale businesses. And in this market, hardware is the key. And so to parallel the idea of gorillas, chimps, and monkeys, we came up with king, princes, and serfs. And the idea is hierarchy of power. That's the trick. All right, this is almost always hardware or non-network effect platform companies with modest software content. You're going to look at something like NVIDIA, what they're a hardware company, they're a chip company. They're trying to work desperately to have a lot of software content in and around their product to make their product have network effects a bit or scale a bit more like a software company's. And here's the insight, Moore's law, a different Moore, that's Gordon Moore from Intel, Moore's law erodes those hardware advantages and over time, and it really destroys competitive advantage. The ability to hold that competitive advantage is very hard over time. All right, so we've got the guerrilla game and we've got the royalty game. That's the key. All right, so here are the trading investment rules that you use for each of the games. All right, guerrilla game, you buy the category, particularly as you think it's crossing the chasm. I think that's the key. And then as the gorilla emerges, the gorilla is that company that gets to scale before everybody else. You sell the monkeys and you monitor the chimps. You want to sell the monkeys because as the gorilla emerges, the monkeys are going to suffer. And you'll start to see that. The monkeys will fall by the wayside. Now, one of the things we talk about in the book is you don't have to be brilliant at selling the monkeys because you're going to make so much money on the gorilla that any losses that you had on monkeys, it's going to be immaterial. And then you monitor the chimps. That's kind of the key. And then you sell the chimps as they falter because you're buying the category. The category is going to go into hypergrowth, and you really want to benefit from as much as possible. And then early on, you're kind of buying everybody in the category, not clear who the gorilla will be. I remember at the time I was following networking companies, and the two strongest companies in that market, well, really three, were Cisco, Synoptics, and Cabletron. And it wasn't clear, even somebody close to the industry, who was going to merge, but it became clear over time it was Cisco. And so if you'd owned all three, not knowing for sure who the gorilla was, and then as Cisco merged as the gorilla, you could sell off. You sold off your Wellfleet. You sold off some of the other companies. Much of this is documented in the book. But you monitored Cabletron and Synoptics, and then as they started to falter or had an issue, you sold them off. Still made a lot of money, but you made so much money on Cisco that it didn't matter if you lost a little bit of money on your monkeys or if you even lost some money on the chimps. So you sell off the chimps when they falter, and you're left with only a position in the gorilla. That's the gorilla game. The royalty game is similar, but got some important subtleties. You buy the category, but really just focus on kings and princes. Avoid the serfs because the serfs are never going to make any money. It's too competitive of a market. That's the key. So you buy the category, but kings and princes only. And then kings and princes are really the leading companies in that market. Now, it's quite possible that king will emerge. But where I think Geoff was really clever in this game is the princes are always trying to knock off the kings. That's kind of why the royalty game works well as a metaphor here. Whereas, the gorilla game, the chimps never stand a chance to knock off the gorilla. And I think that's important. I think that's true. But in the royalty game, the princes are always going to be vying against the king. Avoid the serfs. You're not going to make any money. You sell the weak princes as they stumble, and you sell the king when the growth rate slows. That's the key, and that's the big difference. You can potentially own the gorilla through that transition from high growth to slower growth, although even that I think is pretty tricky. But the royalty game is one where you're going to always have your fingers close to the sell trigger, whereas the gorilla game, you really want to own that gorilla for the maximum amount of time. So that's really kind of the difference between the two. And the way you tell the difference between kind of a gorilla game and a royalty game is really that hardware software comparison. The software side, I'm going to put true platforms in that case. So Facebook, true platform, eBay, true platform. Those are the ones. Whereas the hardware stuff is Intel and the networking companies, the PC companies. I think many of the chip companies even today are more in the royalty game. That's kind of the key. All right, now when growth slows, which is inevitable, although it may take many years, your growth decelerates. Valuation, let's talk about gorilla game first. Growth decelerates, valuation resets, turbulence emerges for sure. The gorilla will survive and ultimately recover, but you've got some valuation reset going on there. Because remember when we talked about the investment rules in the last video, the key there in my mind is the moment growth starts to slow, you should move to the sidelines because it's hypergrowth. That's the investment thesis, is hypergrowth. And when that slows down, you should move to the side. Gorillas generally survive, and they do very well, but you're going to have a lot of valuation turbulence. The royalty game is very different. When growth decelerates, you've got a problem. Competitive pressures return. There's no switching costs to hardware generally. The barriers to enter are much lower. Those competitive advantages are tested. Battle for profits begins, and valuation matters a lot on the hardware side. So, gorilla game, you can hold the gorilla. You're going to have a lot of turbulence. It may take a little while to grow into the valuation. So, you have to live with that. I think maybe move to the side, come back. The royalty game, you're gone. Gone. There's no trying to muscle through it because it's not going to end well. Once the competitive pressures return, unless the company has true competitive advantages, that's going to be a problem. All right. Now, I talked about this little chart. So when I met Geoff on the airplane, Palm Springs to San Francisco, I drew this chart for him. And what you see on the left is a sigmoid. We talked a little bit about that. That's the S curve. And then on the right are competitive advantage charts, which we drew at the time. I now refer to that as the Italian cookie. And you'll see a little bit later as we move into traditional growth, next couple of videos, I'm going to come back to this chart a bit and show you where that curved chart on the right comes from. And then the arrow is what I drew for Geoff, is that's that expansion in enterprise value. The area under the curve is the enterprise value. So you can see here that as the gorilla mostly goes through that S curve, the key is their enterprise value expands dramatically, maybe even exponentially. And that's kind of the key. All right, so this is the chart I drew for Geoff when we had lunch in 95, and then we started the book in 97. I said two things to him at lunch. Number one is, what are we writing? And he said, we're merely writing a book based on that napkin you gave me. This is that picture, a replication of that picture. And number two, the name of the book is The Gorilla Game. And so I was sold at lunch. Pretty cool. All right, here's two pictures from the book. Literally, I took these myself, and you can see that early resemblance to what we were talking about before. Now, in this Value of Growth series, I've been able to work on all of this for the last 25 years, and we've been able to take it to the next level. But I'm pretty excited because this is what I gave Geoff, and this is what ended up in the book, which is pretty cool. I like to see. All right, so there's your total available market. We talked about it. There is the current version of the Italian cookie, which I think is really pretty cool, and that maps perfectly to that enterprise value. So this was that original chart. So if we go back to the what I drew Geoff, this is what ended up in the book. This is that total available market S curve, and then here is the current Italian cookie. In the next video, I'm going to start to build this up so you can see where all these shapes come from, if you will. All right, so this Italian cookie maps perfectly to the enterprise value, and so if we just layer them on, guess what? There is now the replication of that original napkin, which I'm pretty excited about. All right, in hypergrowth, there are only a couple of things that really matters. Number one is crossing the chasm. We've talked about a bit about that in this video. We've talked a bit about that in the prior video. And then how big the market is. Now, I would argue that total available market is very hard to determine. I'll give you a couple of rules of thumb on the next slide. And then valuation doesn't matter. Growth alone drives stock prices. So therefore, your investment thesis is growth. When that investment thesis breaks, meaning that growth slows, guess what? It is time to get out of the position. That's the key. All right, so now we talked about this in valuation. You can go back and watch that video if you have not, right? Changes in stock prices is driven by changes in investor expectations. And this is the key. Stock prices change because consensus expectations change about growth. Growth is the driver. So this is lecture 28. The series is called Value of Growth. It's taken me 28 lectures to get to this slide, right? Stock prices change because consensus expectations change about growth. So I built this all up so you could see that slide. I think that's what's really important. Here's a bunch of S curves over time, which are pretty cool. I collect these charts. I think it's pretty neat. You can just see lots of big product categories have gone through some pretty impressive S curves. Here's another version of the same chart. As I said, I collect these charts. If you have one out there, send it to me. I'll add it to my deck and give you credit, which is great. I thought this one's pretty funny. This is from 2007, so 15 years ago or whatever, even more. Down at the bottom, thanks to G. Moore. That's a little nod to Geoff Moore, crossing the chasm. I thought some of this is incredibly funny. I think my favorite is right in the middle, early majority. I heard Ashton Kutcher has one. And then late majority, I found it at Sam's Club. And then on the far right, that's my dad. He's a Luddite. He passed away many years ago, but he was a bit of a Luddite. So I thought this was really great. And then this chart I really loved. This was the back page of a research report. This is probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it's exactly what we've talked about, a little different version, but that high innovation to me is the hyper growth. Competitive fade is when growth rates slow, competitive advantages are tested, and then the others are sort of maturity. I just thought that was pretty cool as well. All right, total addressable market. I stole this from Michael Mobison, so I want to give him credit. Three kind of rules. The first one is you kind of estimate the total population. A lot of VCs do this. What percent of market penetration? So that gives you a sense of kind of the available customer base, and then you can go look at customer conversion, both as in percentage, as in a diffusion curve. I think that's pretty good. It works much better in venture capital than it does in public stocks, in my mind. Number two is use prior markets to establish base rates for potential markets or growth rates. I think this one's pretty good. I'm a big believer in base rates. I think anytime you have a base rate, you should refer to it and use it. You don't follow them slavishly, but you have them kind of influence your thinking. I think that's a good tool. The third one is that chasm diffusion market. I'm a big believer in that. Obviously, I focus all my research around that. All my courses around that. So, but these are kind of the three. And what you can do in some ways is you could use all three and triangulate back. But for me, chasm, following the what's going on in the market on a real-time basis, is the most insightful and the most powerful. So that's sort of the key. All right, that is what I have for you today. The next video, we're going to shift gears. We're done with hypergrowth. We're going to go into more traditional growth, which would be growth less than 15%, or maybe probably even less than 10%. I'm going to model that and show you how that impacts valuation. And then I'm going to walk through kind of the buildup of the Italian cookie chart, which I just showed you. And then we'll finish out growth, over the next couple of videos. All right, thank you.